It was Derek Oaks. I'm a retired Air Force colonel and fighter pilot, and I'm the owner and founder of Decisive Leadership LLC. And we're going to talk today about flying aircraft and leadership and how the lessons I learned flying aircraft translate into everyday life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show, your number one destination for inclusive insights and today's most compelling success stories. I'm your host, Taruvinga, and today we've got a guest whose life reads like an action-packed novel. Now, Derek, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, the pleasure is all mine. It's not every day that we come across a retired colonel who's, been in the Air Force and now is helping others, with leadership and things of that nature. So the pleasure is definitely all mine. For those that are watching right now, thank you so much for tuning into the Online Prosperity Show. And obviously, as promised, we're going to be talking about Derek here, who is an author and also now, is helping other people with actionable strategies for personal and professional growth. Now, I want you to imagine having to soar through the skies at supersonic speeds, obviously making split-second decisions with lives on the line. And that's exactly what retired Colonel Derek Oaks has done in his previous life. So as a former Air Force fighter pilot and combat commander, Derek has actually faced near-death experiences that have shaped his unique perspective on leadership and resilience. And we're going to be hearing all about that today as, we unfold his experience. But here's a fun tidbit about all of this. Despite this whole high action nature of his career, Derek is actually known for his light-hearted approach and often jokes about that he doesn't take himself too seriously. And he has already shown me that while we were trying to, adjust the camera, he's already, started throwing in those jokes there. But the one thing he takes really serious is his message, as you will discover. So in today's episode, we are going to dive into Derek's thrilling past, his current endeavors with Decisive Leadership LLC, and we also uncover the lessons that he's learned along the way. We also explore how his military experience translates into actionable strategies for personal and professional growth. So I encourage you to buckle up and prepare for a journey that actually promises to be both entertaining and enlightening. Now, Derek, I could go on and talk about things that I have no qualification over. First of all, thank you so much for your service. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and maybe what it was like for you being a high flyer in the military.
Well, I'll start by saying that as a kid, I grew up around airplanes, and I really never thought of doing anything else. I mean, I would try and sit down and go, do I want to go into business? Do I want to do sales? And none of that grabbed me. None of that had any interest. I always liked being around airplanes. And when it came time to make the real decisions, I realized that I wasn't going to do anything else with my life besides, fly aircraft. And I was very lucky to eventually get into fighter aircraft. It's not an easy path. You have to go through, officer selection. I went to the Air Force Academy. You have to, so you're going through basic training, you're going through the years of training for that. You've got to obviously graduate from college. And then going to pilot training, I would liken the year of pilot training to, many people have said it's kind of like 3 years of law school or 4 years of medical school all crammed into 1 year, because you don't have, there aren't any second chances really. You can be on the top of the world on Monday, and by the next Monday you're out because you fail a ride, you fail another ride, and you fail a third ride, and all of a sudden you're Mr. Oaks, and you're looking for a different career. You're looking to do something different. So that induces a lot of stress on the program. As I look back on it, I think, man, I was flying high performance aircraft as an early 20 something. Why was I not enjoying it as much? And I think the answer is that the stress involved with that. I was glad that I got to do it long enough to really appreciate it and enjoy flying aircraft. I flew for about 24 years in the Air Force. And in my 24 years in the Air Force, I flew 21 of those years. And I'm grateful for the different aircraft that I was able to fly, for the different environments I was able to work in. The thing I love about flight is that it's very black and white. You can't cheat physics, and you can't defy the laws of physics. So, uh, you know, you fly correctly, or you fly with the laws of physics, or you hurt yourself, or you hurt other people. And so understanding that, understanding the life or death nature of it, not that flying is super dangerous, but it can kill you pretty quickly if you're not paying attention, if you're not understanding those rules of physics. But
Absolutely.
I love flying. I love flying, and I still do it today, not as much, not in as cool airplanes, but I still love just getting up in the air.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate that, because once you're up in the air, you've got a whole different perspective, but also you got to respect that perspective in and of itself, you know. Now, you said you grew up around planes. What sort of environment was that?
My dad was a fighter pilot, so I grew up bouncing around Air Force bases as a kid. Listening to jets overhead, listening to fighter aircraft overhead. I really just didn't know there was any other career. I just assumed everybody's dad was a fighter pilot, and so I came to like that. I mean, I idolized my dad as a little kid. He would come home, from flying. So like I said, I just didn't think of doing anything else. I just assumed that's what I was going to do.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, that being the case, it obviously sort of gives you something to look forward to. And that now starts, the journey of having a role model, somebody that you can, liken yourself to. But what sort of conversations would you have had with other kids, growing up? What was that the same path they wanted to be on, or was that just a Derek Oaks thing?
I had quite a few friends who ended up flying aircraft, either transport aircraft or fighter aircraft. It's a competitive selection to get to a fighter aircraft, and so just depending on how somebody did in pilot training, and also what they wanted to do. But quite a few of my friends ended up flying aircraft or being around aircraft. It wasn't something that I talked about a lot. Like I said, I just didn't really think about it. I would that was what I was going to do, and that was it.
Absolutely. And I like how you've mentioned that, flying had always been the thing for you. And, after that 24 years of you being, in the military, it had to come to an end. What was it like for you to transition into civilian life, when all you've ever known about your life was just being up in the air?
You know, Flying aircraft is a constant challenge, and it's a constant, am I passing or am I failing? Am I good enough to be where I am? But I honestly think that one of the hardest things I've done was transition out. I reached a point where I wasn't going to get to fly aircraft anymore. So I had to make a choice to either stay in and do a desk job, or get out. And for a number of reasons, mainly family reasons, I got out. And I'll tell you, my wife, I don't think she liked living with me, because I felt kind of lost. You have a purpose and you know where you're going for 24 years, and then all of a sudden you don't. And all of a sudden you think, well, am I going to build houses? Am I going to be a consultant? Am I going to fly for the airlines? Am I going to lead a business? And I didn't know, I really hadn't thought about those things too much. And so it was a lot of soul searching and trying to figure out what really mattered to me. And like I said, I don't think my wife liked being around me at that time, because I bounced from one thing to another. And looking back on it, all those things taught me something, but it took me a while to find home.
Absolutely. And what is it that you call home now?
What I call home, honestly, is calling on the experiences, the good and the bad ones of the last 30 plus years to help other organizations, to help other people kind of define their vector. Where do they want to go with their lives, and where do they want to go with their organization? And then how do you define that? How do you share that? And how do you then execute on that vision?
And as you would notice, a lot of leaders in most of the places that you are now working with, they struggle with decisiveness. But for somebody who was a fighter pilot, you had to make high stake decisions. Like you say, there are laws and rules to flying a plane. You had to make split second decisions in a moment. And like you keep referring, you could either hurt yourself or hurt others. You know what I mean? What sort of strategies do you then work with, some leaders for helping them, first of all, making decisions and especially under pressure?
One of the things I say a lot is make a decision and move on. And because you can always adjust, your decision. There's a thing that fighter pilots use a lot, and actually quite a few businessmen use it, called the OODA loop. It was a thought process thought of by Colonel John Boyd. He was a former fighter pilot, and it's observe, orient, decide, and act. And we would say that you get better when you accelerate your OODA loop. When you can accelerate, uh, what you're looking at, recognizing what you're looking at, orienting yourself in the direction you want to go, making a decision, and then acting on that decision, and then starting that whole process over again. And sometimes you have OODA loops acting in parallel. I'm flying the airplane, and that requires certain decisions, but then I'm also executing a mission, or I'm also performing leadership responsibilities. And so all those things are going on near simultaneously or simultaneously. And so helping people to just make a decision, not be afraid to fail. And, we can get into analysis paralysis, where you as long as you're pointing in the right direction. So as long as you have that vision, you're pointing in the right direction, your failures are going to be less and less. Every time you make that decision, you analyze how you did, you give yourself a little bit of a debrief, and then you make the next decision. Then you make the next decision. And the more you make decisions with your vision in mind, the better you're going to be at making a decision, and the more confident you're going to be at making a decision. And then if you do that in an organization where you are trusting your people to make decisions and expecting them to make decisions, and then constantly helping them with a kind of refining of the vision and helping everybody understand where we're going, the entire team is going to be much more confident in their abilities because they're practiced. They've done it over and over again. And even if the actual decision may be changing, the actual focus may be changing, the process of making a decision is not changing.
Quite like that. And I like the way you incorporate and help with the team there, because it's akin to flying a jet. All right. Yes, you might be the pilot, but there's an engineer, there's somebody who looks after the fuel, somebody who looks after the landing gear and things of that nature. And before you fly, you need to make sure that you tick off things off of a checklist. I don't know if that's only for commercial pilots or even in your sort of space. And that would actually be like running an organization in and of itself, and then just course correcting as you go. Because I've heard that if you just miss by 1 degree with a plane, and if it keeps going in a whole different place, you will land in a totally different place than where you started off from. So would that be somewhat akin to how you're helping people observe, orient, decide, and then act, especially when it comes to the work?
Well, that's exactly it. When you're flying an airplane, it is a question of degrees. So I'm going north 360 degrees, and then I take my eye off it for a little bit, and I drift to now I'm going 001 degrees or 002 degrees, and that may not seem like a big deal, but over 60 miles, 1 degree off over 60 miles, I'm a mile off of where I wanted to be. And so making constant course corrections, those are decisions. I'm I'm too far to the right, I need to come left. I'm too far to the left, I need to come right. So you're constantly making those kind of decisions, but you always have in your mind, where do I want to go? Where do I want to be? What is my desired heading? What is my desired, end state? And then you're constantly making, those minor corrections to get you there. If you make one big correction, you think that's going to get you there, or what one decision think that's going to get you there, and you're not making those regular debriefs to yourself, you're going to end up in the wrong place, because no decision is perfect and no action is perfect. You need to be constantly correcting that.
Absolutely. Now, your company, Decisive Leadership LLC, you're offering workshops and consulting. Maybe can you walk us through what people can expect if they begin to work, with you guys?
The first thing because it's kind of the primer for sitting down with a team, is a keynote. I offer a number of keynotes. The first one, and I can obviously adjust these based on organizational needs, but the first one is, the confident leader, creating a culture of confident leadership. And that's a lot of what I've been talking about here. So doing a keynote where I give the overall message, and then I step through with an organization how those steps apply to their organization, where it's a lot of back and forth of, what is your vision? What is your vision for the organization overall? What is your personal vision? What are your teammates' visions? And are they all synced up? How do you demonstrate trust to your people? How do you empower them? How do you make them feel trusted? And then what does a debrief look like? What is the frequency of debrief? Is a debrief akin to just top-down criticism? The answer is no. So what does a debrief look like? And so that's my main keynote, and that kind of takes it into the workshop. And then I can work one-on-one, or one-on-team, with organizations for follow-up afterwards, to help ensure that they get the message and they're applying the message. It wasn't just a great speech with cool pictures of airplanes, that they're actually applying it to their own mission, their own vision, and where they want to go. And then I have another one where I talk about focusing on what matters now. And again, I use, because it's my background, I use flying aircraft as my paradigm, and as some of my learning points about how important it is to focus on what you're doing right now. I talk about the difference between conscious acts and subconscious acts. I talk about how multitasking is a myth. Despite what people say, they're not multitasking. They're just doing 2, 3, 4 things poorly. Your brain can only focus on one thing. And I talk about what that looks like. And I talk about focus allocation of, shifting from one thing to another, to another, to another really, really rapidly. I use some examples of flying an airplane, in the middle of a mission, and you're juggling a lot of tasks, but you can only focus on one thing at a time. So how do I do that? And I do that by focus allocation. How much time do I need to stare at my attitude indicator and then process that information? How much time do I need to look at my target? How much time do I need to look at the potential threats and my threat environment? How much time do I need to allocate to interact with my wingman? How much time do I need to spend flying the airplane, looking at my engine gauges and making sure I'm heading in the right direction, and set the right, and I'm in the right altitude block, and I have the right weapon selected, and all of those different things, and how I do that, and some techniques for pushing things into the subconscious, so that I can subconsciously do many tasks and consciously do one task, and I'm consciously doing what's most important. And those messages, you can probably hear, they're very similar. They're very helpful and complementary to each other. And then I can also talk about how do you exceed expectations? How do you create a team that exceeds expectations? How do you go above and beyond what you may have thought possible today or yesterday, when you get to tomorrow, and how do you get there? And so, like I said, with all those things, I talk about the overall message, and then in a workshop, I make it apply to them. And then with follow-up consulting, it's just kind of stepping through what that looks like for the team, and how are we doing, and did they grasp the message, and does that need to be adjusted at all?
Absolutely. See, I like how you reflect on that, the grasping of the message, especially because you're talking to a bunch of civilians, people that have never been in a high stakes environment and people that have never really faced their own near death, so sort of experience. The worst could be maybe breaking a nail or losing an eyelash, and that's what people would have experienced. Now, some might also argue, Derek, that sort of military leadership style that you possess, because everything that you're saying reflects back to that high octane environment of being in the army. It might be a little bit too rigid for Sally, in accounting or things of that nature, especially in the corporate world. Now, how do you then adapt your approach to fit, diverse organizational, cultures that are sprouting in the world that we live in today? Because I don't know if you've noticed, the playgrounds are getting softer.
I will tell you that when I first got out of the Air Force, I thought, now I'm going into the business world, I'm going to the corporate world, and it's going to be very different. And what I found is that leadership is leadership, vision is vision, trust is trust, and focus is focus. And the same exact principles apply. The tempo may be a little bit different. What the focus is going to be maybe a little different, and how you demonstrate trust and how you inspire people with a vision, those may be different. The techniques may be a little bit different, but the requirements are still there. The requirements are still really important across the board. In so many companies that I've worked with, like, okay, where are we going? What's the purpose of this contract? What's the purpose of this effort? And too often I couldn't get a straight answer. Too often I couldn't get people to elaborate and explain where they were going. And if the boss doesn't know, the boss can't explain it, then the worker bees aren't going to get it. If two partners can't have a meeting of the mind and be able to share it with each other and come to an agreement of where they're going, then the company's in trouble. And I don't care how talented they are. I don't care how good of people they are. They're going to struggle with what do we do next, and what is our focus, and how do we expend our resources. And I found that trusting somebody with your vision is one of the hardest things for a leader, but it's absolutely critical for team members to feel like they matter, instead of just being an extension of a coffee getter, somebody who's just going to do something that you don't want to do for yourself. You have to, by feeling trusted, they're going to extend themselves. They're going to go the extra mile. They're going to try a little bit harder. They're going to take risks that they otherwise wouldn't take. Instead of just sitting there going, well, I'm waiting to be told what to do, they're going to engage their brain, and they're going to say, how do I solve this problem? How do I realize the vision that is our team's vision? And then from a debrief perspective, I would say the fighter pilot world it's the best there is at, especially American fighter pilots, it's the best there is at analyzing how you did. It's very objective focused. It's very mission focused, and there's no pride of authorship. There's no rank does not matter. You look at the objectives and it's a yes or no. Did I meet my objectives? And if I didn't meet my objectives, what do I need to do to get there? What are my lessons learned to allow me to get to my objectives? And if I didn't, and if I did meet my objectives, well, then fantastic. Still, what can I do better? Where are ways? Where are some instances in that mission where I fell short of what my expectations were for myself? And that applies across the board. Any business you go in, any organization you go in, those tenets are going to be applicable to every single member of the organization. You have veterans, and this is talking a little bit about resilience. Veterans, they often get out of the military. I told you how I was kind of feeling lost when I first got out. They get out of the military where they've spent 4, 8, or 28 years as part of a team, and they had a defined role, and they had a mission, and they mattered. And then they go out and they're just a number. They're just somebody who's supposed to move this widget from there to there, or they're supposed to fill out this form and submit it, or they're supposed to requisition, these parts, or whatever it is. They lose that sense of team. They lose that sense of purpose. And when you have that sense of team, that sense of purpose, that comes because you have a shared vision and a shared mission, and you have ownership of that mission, and you're willing to take risks and make decisions to realize that vision. And that applies, like I said, across all human interaction, regardless of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And if somebody's intrigued about, the way you operate at Decisive Leadership, what would be the best path for them to take in order to maybe, have a chat with you or seek consultation?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, just Derek Oaks on LinkedIn. You can go to my webpage, which is derekoaks.com, and then just send me an email there, and then we can start a conversation. And the first conversation is, I'm not going to waste your time if we're not a good fit, if I don't have anything to offer you. But more often than not, I think I'm going to be able to offer you something to help you be better at what you're already doing. Even if you're an expert, even if you're fantastic at what you do, there's always something that we can do better. So those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me.
Absolutely. I'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes so that people can actually choose their pathway and get in touch with you, Derek. Now, when we started the show, you introduced us to a character who has become very pivotal in your life, and that was your dad.
Yes.
He sort of introduced you to the world of flying and the world of, jet pilots that you then took a liking to. And you went on, when you got a bit older, became a pilot, and then you actually even co-authored a book with him, Rising Above. Hats off to General Robert Oaks there. Now, first of all, how did this sort of collaboration come about, and what's the most surprising thing that you actually learned about each other during this process?
I tell you, it started, I wasn't planning on writing a book. I was, my dad he's in his 80s, in his late 80s. And so he was early 80s when we wrote the book. He had a brain injury about 12 years ago, where it inhibited his ability to make decisions and to his executive function. And yet he still is very, very sharp. He is still a great mentor and teacher. He has such a great recall, and his memory of things that he's done in the past is so great. So I would sit down with him after I retired. I'd go over and visit him, and I invariably, every single conversation revolved around flying. You're talking about kids, you're talking about family. Next thing you know, you're talking about airplanes. And at some point, I thought, why am I not writing these things down? Because it wasn't just talking about flying, but it was, what did I learn from that mission? What did I learn from that instance? How did I grow as a person from what I did there? And so I started just kind of taking notes in a spiral notebook. And I thought, maybe I'll write this down and I'll give it to my 5 siblings, and I'll give it to a copy to the 18 grandkids. And the more we wrote, the more I thought, I think there's actually value in what we're doing. My dad is a 4-star general. People called him sir, and people, paid homage to him, and he was very highly respected. He still is very highly respected. And yet he recognized where he came from. One of the things I loved from him is that he would say, I always assumed that there's somebody else smarter than me in the room. And so that meant that he needed to listen to other people, because there was somebody that was going to teach him something in any given moment. And so, and that book is about, how do we learn to become who we are today through flying? Our paradigm is flying. You have plumbers and carpenters and folks who do different things, and from all those jobs, you can learn, about yourself, and you can grow as a person and as a leader. And for us, it was flying. So we started sharing them, and talking about planes is exciting for us. And we found that people liked listening to the stories about flying, and some of them were near-death experiences. And so we we went ahead and wrote the book. And
Oh,
one of the highlights of my adult life is I've always valued my dad's opinion, and I've always loved to learn from him about what, how he got to where he is and what mattered to him. And so sitting down with him and sharing notes and swapping stories was a fantastic experience.
absolutely. I don't think a lot of people can have that sort of commonality with, like a parent and actually go on and create something remarkable in there. But you shared in that book, some near-death experiences because, it's a high-flying endeavor that both of you guys were doing. Can you maybe recount one of them that profoundly changed your outlook on life?
Uh, sure. I'll just because it's the first one that came to my mind. I had retired from the Air Force and I was flying contract training for the Air Force in an old British jet fighter, and I was taking off out of an airport in Henderson, Nevada, and the aircraft was a 50-plus-year-old aircraft. It had um, some minor issues, but overall it was pretty airworthy, and I'd flown it, many, many times. And as I took off, as I rotated on the runway, it was a short runway. As I rotated, the aircraft started to vibrate like it was about to stall on me, and 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 so I quickly, did a kind of a frantic scan of the cockpit of what's wrong. Is my engine running properly, and what is my configuration? And so as I got away from the ground, and the problem with where I was flying out of is the runway was short enough that the minute I got off the ground, I was committed. And so I raised the gear to get rid of some drag and to climb up a little bit. What I didn't know, and I didn't have a gauge in the cockpit, was that my flaps had failed to full. And what that means is that, I've got a wing out there that's providing me lift, but when the flaps go to full, it's giving me more lift, but it's also giving me an excessive amount of drag. It's like putting big barn doors out there and you're trying to fly. And you have an aircraft that's underpowered to start with, and now you're trying to power through all this drag out there, and it just was not going to work. And so I passed the end of the runway, and I'm about to depart the airport proper. I realized that I was not going to make it. I realized that the plane was not going to fly, and I was going to crash. And so, you have the runway, and then perpendicular to the runway was a 4-lane highway. And so I'm heading for this 4-lane highway, and it's the middle of the day in Las Vegas. It was a busy highway. Miraculously, I'm slowly descending, and as I'm slowly descending down, I clipped the highway, and I had 2 external fuel tanks on there with about 100 gallons of gas total, and they ripped off, and that saved my life because they ripped off, and I had a big fireball behind me, and the aircraft just settled down to the desert. I elected to land gear up because I was afraid of cartwheeling, and it settled down into the desert. And as I was backing up a little bit, as I was leaving the airport, and I realized I was not going to fly out of it, the thought that came through my mind was, I'm not going to make it. I cannot believe it's going to end this way. And I thought, and it's kind of funny now. I said, I wonder if it's going to hurt. And so then it continued to descend down in the desert. I landed on the belly, came to a screeching halt, and I realized I was still alive, which surprised me. I look around, I look to my right, and I've got flames coming up the side of the aircraft. And all I can think about is I got to get out of here. So I unstrap myself, and I open the canopy, and then I run away from the aircraft. And I look back. I run away about 200 yards, and I look back, and I said, what just happened? And then the next thought that came through my mind was, I got to get my taxes done because I hadn't finished my taxes for the year. I said, I got to get my taxes done. My wife will kill me if I don't have them done. And so all that happened so fast. And I look back and I think there are things that I could have done better. But the number one thing, and this kind of goes to focus and just subconscious actions, the number one thing when you are struggling with controlling an aircraft is do not let it stall. If you get too slow and you exceed your angle of attack, the aircraft's going to fall on you, and you're going to end up hitting the ground like this instead of landing on your belly. And yet, almost nobody walks away from a stalled aircraft. And so, what I did well was I belly landed it and I flew it just above the stall as it was descending down into the desert, and belly landed into the desert. And so with anything else that I may have done wrong, I did that one thing right, and that's what saved my life. And so I can go back and review, what could I have done better on other things, but that was the one thing that really mattered, and it was because it had been beaten into my head. Don't stall the aircraft. Don't stall the aircraft. And thousands of hours of flying aircraft, I had learned do not stall the aircraft, especially when you're close to the ground. And what does it feel like? What does an aircraft feel like when it's close to stall? When it's descending down like this, I could feel, because it's kind of a little of a rumble, and the flight controls are not really responsive. And so you know what a stall feels like. And if I had pulled back on the stick a little bit more trying to avoid the ground, I would have stalled it and I would have tipped over and killed myself. And so having practiced that literally hundreds and thousands of times, I knew not to stall the aircraft.
Wow.
That was, yeah. And my wife found out about it and she said, I don't think I like you flying this old aircraft.
Well, congratulations. You actually, escaped that one alive. But I would have thought during that conversation, you would have maybe had that emergency, what do you call that? The emergency parachute, and then you'd have just let the flight, the
Well,
plane go.
ejection. Well, the thing is, most of those aircraft come with ejection seats. This aircraft didn't. I had a parachute on me, but you've got to be high enough away from the ground for a parachute to work. So, had I just jumped out and pulled the chute, then I would have hit the ground. I would have killed myself.
Oh, wow. Well, obviously that people would have to read the book in order to get more of that story. But, now that everything is on the ground, we've actually landed, no more high octane activities happening. What's next? What's happening now that you're working on that people can get excited about, Derek?
I'm working on a book in line with my first keynote called The Confident Leader, Creating a Culture of Confident Decision Makers. And I've taken a lot of the lessons that some of which we've talked about here, and just outlining it more thoroughly so that somebody can sit down and read and have the time to go through that. My hope is that it's out by next fall, that it's published in print, for people to buy by next fall, so that people can. I mean, it's something I'm very passionate about. I love it when an organization develops a vision, shares the vision, and acts on that vision, and they are constantly course correcting and constantly getting better at it. And there's a level of trust there, and they're not afraid to make decisions. And that's really what I'm going to talk about in the book.
Absolutely. Now, Derek, I can't thank you enough for the time that we've spent on the call today. And obviously, your life story and your experience really has so many lessons for people that want to excel in leadership. But I don't know if you've noticed, you've actually committed the ultimate sin there, Derek.
What's that?
You mentioned that you're writing a book, and you didn't say you were going to come and launch it on the Online Prosperity Show. So,
all right. Well, we'll have to circle back and do that then.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey and all these insights with us today. And for our listeners that are eager to elevate their leadership skills and overcome personal challenges, I highly recommend that you dive into Derek's book, Rising Above, and explore the services that are offered by Decisive Leadership LLC. And I will be putting all those links in the show notes below. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the Online Prosperity Show for more inspiring stories and actionable advice. And I'll have you know, in our next episode, we're going to be exploring innovative ideas designed to enhance your happiness and well-being. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.